Hello, everybody. My name is Steve, and it's Friday, so it's time for the Friday conversation. And I am joined today with author Nicholas Kuafmann. Nicholas, thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And we were talking before we went live about fungi and some other things. I want to get to that here in a second. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm getting known to be the fungi guy.
that's not a bad thing. I mean, there's worse things to be known by. So, of all things, that's not bad. So, what kind of books do you write? What for people who aren't familiar with your work, what kind of books do you write? What's
Okay.
your genre? What's
Yeah, most of what I write is horror or dark fantasy, though I also had a few urban fantasy novels come out from St. Martin's. I've been at this game a long time. I think my first professionally published story was in 2000. So I've been a professional writer for 21 years now, which is funny to think about because obviously I can't possibly be as old as I am. But yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I've got, I think, about 7 novels out, a couple of collections of short stories, and I really cut my teeth on horror. So even if I'm not writing horror, it kind of is horror. And in fact, my latest book, the one we're going to talk about most tonight, The Hungry Earth, actually started life as I was trying to write just a straightforward science thriller.
Hmm.
But I've been writing horror for so long it just seeped in. It just automatically seeped in. And the Hungry Earth, even though I tried to keep it, on course with some real science and stuff like that, it wound up being one of my probably the most gruesome book I've written so far. There's a lot of like crazy body horror in there.
So it started out as a science fiction book, and it went into the worst kind of horror. It's
Not
funny.
really science fiction because it wasn't. I wasn't.
Okay.
I didn't want to. I didn't want to exaggerate the science. I wanted to use real science as much as I could. So really, just a sort of a science-based thriller.
Hmm.
But as I said, I've been writing horror for so long. It's in my DNA, I guess, and it just comes out in whatever I write.
Yeah. And Alex, the bookie business here, I want to say a special thank you to Alex because she is the reason we are both here today. So I want to thank her
Yes, I want to
again.
say thank you to Alex too. She was so nice when I reached out to her for recommendations on who to talk to. Really, every interaction I've had with Alex has been great. She's wonderful, and she's one of my favorite booktubers.
Definitely very positive and easygoing, and just pleasant to watch her videos too.
Plus, she loves vintage horror, and I mean, who doesn't love vintage horror? Those covers alone are amazing.
Isn't it wild how different the covers are from the vintage books to now?
Yes,
It's There's a huge difference. What do you think what caused that the
I think.
tone? Is it just popularity or?
Well, I think yes, I think there are definitely market trends to take into consideration, but I think there's also an editorial angle where after sort of there was a big glut of horror books in the 80s and early 90s, and they all had sort of that similar vibe going on with their covers, where it was a skeleton cheerleader or a skeleton behind the wheel of a car or a bloody doll or whatever, and of course that lit everyone's imagination at the time. At the time, I was like, oh, I got to read this book and find out why there's a skeleton behind the wheel of a car. But I know, but then it stopped selling as well. Horror sort of had its peak and then came down in a pretty hard crash in the 90s. Um, and It never stopped being published, but I think they wanted to make it look a little classier when they were publishing it. So they got cover designers with design degrees or what have you, and they started to give them, I guess, classier covers. I feel very lucky actually with the cover to The Hungry Earth because it's a bit of a throwback. And I love I mean, not just because it has a skull, but it's just the whole sort of feel of it. Um, and I feel I got very lucky with the art on that. That was done by David Dodd
Hmm.
at Crossroad Press, who put that together, and then the cover design was by my friend Aaron Rosenberg, um, and I couldn't be happier. I really do feel, even if the book itself isn't quite 80s horror, I do like having that feeling of a link between 80s horror and what I've written in the form of this skull cover.
Yeah. So speaking of the cover, I noticed there's some fungi on the cover. What can you tell us about that?
Well,
Because
there's a lot in the book about fungus. I did a lot of research on this, and it was honestly, I never thought I would say this, but the research was the most fun of writing this book. I found out so much about fungus. I read a wonderful book called Entangled Life by Dr. Merlin Sheldrake, which has got to be one of the greatest author names I've ever heard. And it's all about fungus and how fungus interacts with the life around it, and that's what sort of lit the spark for writing this book. It's I don't want to give too much away about the book. I want people to go on the adventure of discovery that that narrative really is. But fungus plays an important role in this, and some of the things I found out during my research phase were really astonishing. And my friends are all like, they don't want to have dinner with me anymore because all I do is talk about fungus to them, especially like scary fungus. Fungus does some wonderful things in the natural world. There's this crazy concept that they call the wood wide web, where fungus is basically interacting with all the trees in a section of the forest. It's connecting to all of their root systems, and it's trading nutrients and in some cases information, which is why people think fungus may have sort of some form of intelligence. But then there's like the scary fungus too. There's like nutso funguses out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Massospora, but this is a terrible fungus that mostly affects cicadas. I know you're familiar with cicadas. We're all familiar with cicadas this year.
yeah.
But you know how cicadas take like basically a 17-year rest underground, right? That's their nymph phase. They live underground, and when they mature, they climb up to the surface, and then they fly around, become the cicadas we know and love. But I know, right? But some of those cicadas, when they're coming up from the ground, they encounter the spores of the Massospora fungus. And this spore enters their bodies and takes them over. It turns them basically into mindless drones, right? So it floods their brains with psilocybin, which is, the psychedelic mushroom drug. And it just keeps them sort of drugged and docile so that they will not be aware of the horror that is about to befall them. Because now the spore takes over the body, and now it flies the cicada around. And what happens is it works its way through the entire cicada body. The back end of the cicada falls off, including its genitalia, just falls off, and is replaced by this white plug of more spores. And the cicada flies around sprinkling spores on other cicadas to sort of make the cycle happen all over again. And one scientist actually referred to it as the flying salt shaker of death. But that's not even the worst of it. That's not even the worst thing that happens.
It gets worse. Okay.
It gets worse.
I'm ready for this.
Because if you are a male cicada, the Massospora spore will make you want to mate with anything and everything that it sees, whether or not it's another cicada, whether or not it's a female. The male will just be like so drugged up it has to mate with everything. So what it's basically doing is shaking more spores onto whatever it can find, thinking that it's mating with them. That's insane. Wow. Right? But that's nature is wild. It's crazy.
So I have a question for you about the spores it spreads. But Lauren Lullaby says, "Scary fungus talk at a dinner party sounds like my kind of dinner party."
I hear you. I hear you.
Seth says, "I too rest for 17 years to come out only to scream."
That is you are a kindred spirit.
Yeah.
But so thinking about dinner, as we mentioned, I love eating mushrooms. I get mushrooms on my pizza all the time. But I got to tell you, doing the research for this book has made me rethink wanting to put mushrooms on my pizza. Not just because there's scary funguses out there like the Massospora, and this is also really weird, Steve. Hang on to your hat for this one. It is thought that way back in history, like the misty reaches of time, the dawn of life, fungus and animals shared a common ancestor. The reason they think this is for two reasons. One, fungi and animals, including humans, share certain proteins that fungi and that plants don't. So fungi are definitely not plants. But also, fungus breathes in oxygen and breathes out carbon dioxide, which is the opposite of what plants do, but is exactly what humans and other animals do. So it's thought that even though we're different kingdoms, humans and fungi might be related.
Really?
Isn't that wild? Like, so now
That
I'm
is
like,
wild.
every time I think about putting a mushroom on my pizza, I'm like, this is my distant cousin.
Oh, so so the spores that the fly spreads, I'll put the salt shaker of death
Yes,
that it
the
spreads,
cicadas.
the cicadas. So is there a hive mind, or are they individual?
It's individual.
So that okay.
In the novel, I took some of the ideas that of not the Massospora, but similar fungi that sort of control or dominate insect life, and I transplanted it to humans. Like the humans are being controlled and dominated basically by fungal spores. Um,
Hmm.
but with the cicadas, yeah, no, there's no hive mind. The spore, the individual spore, is dominating, is drugging, dominating, and controlling each cicada.
Wow, that is amazing, and
It's
that's a
amazing.
yeah. I can see why this book went to the horror,
Right, I
to the
know,
horror.
I know. And I, like I said, I wanted to write just a straight science thriller. Like, what if fungi, instead of just fungi has been manipulating insect life for hundreds of millions of years, since before even humankind existed. What if they got tired of manipulating ants and spiders and what have you, and decided to start manipulating us?
You got to think bigger, right?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Go big or go home, fungus.
yeah.
Come on.
They might hear you. Don't say that.
Yeah. It would be just my luck. Like a fungus reads my book and is like, hey, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Don't give them any ideas. They might come.
Especially because there is this theory of fungal intelligence. I mean, it's very different from human intelligence. I'm not sure fungi have the same sort of self-awareness or consciousness that people have, but it has been discovered scientifically that they communicate with trees,
Hmm.
including bartering for nutrients. And if they're bartering with one tree, we'll give you this nutrient if you give us that nutrient. And then another tree might offer more nutrients, and they say goodbye to this tree, and they like go over to that tree. I don't want to talk
That's
about fungi all night, though. I mean,
no.
I don't want to lose the audience here.
No, I think we
But
could
I'm
talk
so
about it's
fascinated by it. It was
yeah.
an amazing research experience.
Ashley says that makes so much more sense. I'm actually mushroom can confirm.
Then you are very intelligent.
Lauren Lullaby says this is crazy. You can't learn that and not have horror elements.
I think Laura and Lullabies is right. I think it's. I mean, partially it's like what I said before. I've just been writing horror for so long that it seeps into whatever I write. But also, yeah, you can't talk about a foreign intelligence, an inhuman intelligence taking over people, and not have some angle of horror to it. And also, I mean, even though these are not Massospora spores in the novel, there is a lot of body horror. I mean, you have to imagine that if a fungus starts growing inside you at a rapid rate, and what would happen? It's gross, but I like gross
Wow.
research, so I loved it.
So are there any other animal or any other insects that spore is attached to and used to spread around other than cicadas?
Yes, we've a lot of people have already heard of the Cordyceps fungus from the video game The Last of Us, and also from M.R. Carey's amazing novel The Girl with All the Gifts. But this is the one that turns ants into zombies. This is so like it's in the the jungles of South America, and it releases spores, and it will infect ants in the
Hmm.
area, and it takes them over too. It zombifies them. So it forces the ant, again, through the use of psilocybin, through the same drug. It keeps the ant sort of doped up so it can control it. And it makes the, I know, and it makes the ant climb up a stalk of grass or a plant or something like that to the exact right area that has the perfect sort of temperature and climate for the fungus to reproduce. It will force the ant to bite down on the plant and just stay there and basically die from hunger. And then the mushroom will burst out of its head and send out more spores into the jungle to make this all happen again. Wow. But here's the even weirder thing.
It gets weirder? Okay.
It always gets weirder. The natural world is beyond any imagination we could have.
True.
This has been going on for so many hundreds of millions of years that the ants have started to catch on. And the ants in the nest can now figure out which ants have been zombified by the spore before it sort of makes them go crazy. And they will bodily carry the ant out of the nest and leave it just like far away in the jungle. Like,
really?
Get out of here.
Wow.
So
okay. What's the name of this book again? Because I'm buying it and I'm reading it like tomorrow.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's called Entangled Life. Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. You can't forget the name Merlin Sheldrake. That's going to stay with you forever.
Yeah, that's a great name.
In fact, we tried to get a blurb from Dr. Sheldrake for The Hungry Earth, but we weren't able to reach him.
Oh, that's a bummer.
I know. I really wanted him to see this book and see, like, here's what your book has wrought. Like, you had an author of horror read your excellent scientific book and come up with this crazy nightmare book.
Wow. So that's where the mushrooms on the cover come from your research and from
exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Exactly. There's a line in the book, "The future is fungus," and I'm starting to think that may be the case.
After this conversation, yeah, I'm sure. I'm inclined to agree. Yeah. Do you always do a lot of research before you start a book on whatever subject you're planning on writing on, or was this unusual?
Before this book, I used to do, I guess, what's known as micro research, right? I would write the story, and then if I needed to figure out something, if I needed to do research on something that had come up in the story, hop on over to Google and plug it in and get the information I needed. This was really the first time, because this was really a very scientific horror novel. This was the first time I did major research first, because I knew I wanted to get the science right, or as right as I could. Most of the science is in the book is true. I had to stretch one or two things for narrative purposes. But I really wanted it to be as true to life as possible. So I did a lot of research. But it wasn't a chore. It was wonderful to learn all these truly horrifying things about fungi. Yeah. So now when I'm walking down the street, like let's say there's been a rainstorm or something, and you're walking down your street and you see a new mushroom has come up out of a tree or something like that. Now I look at it differently, because I used to look at it like, oh, this is so magical. This is a toadstool. Elves like to sit on the toadstools or whatever. Now I know that what's actually happening is that tree is dead or dying, and the mushroom is eating it from the inside. I'm here to ruin everyone's magical opinion of toadstools.
Oh.
I know you wanted to keep this conversation casual and low key, but I'm worried that I'm grossing everyone out.
No, it's great. I love it. It's a great. No, it's great. I never thought I never imagined fungi would do all those weird things.
And what fodder to write a novel with. I mean, I only scratched the surface of the things that fungi are capable of in this book.
Wow. So there's more to it that you could have done. Did you limit yourself to how much science you included in the book, just for to keep it as real to life as possible, or as
well? I also wanted to keep the pace going. I wanted to keep it a lively pace because it is a thriller. So I didn't want to have people just stopping and talking science through it all.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some scenes of discussions of people trying to figure out what's going on. And there's a character in the book named Victor, who is sort of he's sort of the Hunter Thompson type. He was an Iraq War vet who now lives off the grid and basically just wants to be left alone. He does drugs all the time. He grows his own psilocybin mushrooms in his basement. He has a gun in every cupboard because he thinks one day the jackbooted thugs are going to come for him. He's like that. He was actually the most fun character to write in this book. But he's the one who imparts a lot of mushroom knowledge on the other characters. Oh, including I can't believe I didn't mention this one before. So something like 470 or 490 million years ago, like the Devonian period, the largest life form on land were these like 28-foot tall pillars of fungus.
Really?
Pillars of fungus. This was at a time when most life was still in the water and still very sort of not complex. And so on land, the largest life forms were already these complex fungal structures. And so in the novel, Victor says, this world was always theirs before it was ours, and we were arrogant to think otherwise. And it's true that fungi have millions of years on us in terms of development and learning how to farm, like they farm ants. It's nutso. I like where you know how they used to say once mankind dies out, the cockroaches will take over the world, or any sort of insect. I think it's going to be fungus, man. I think the fungus is going to take over the world after us.
Could be. They could take over cockroaches and have them spread their spores everywhere.
Right? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be around when that happens. So hopefully the end of mankind is millions of years in the future.
Hopefully it's after we're gone. Fit to be read is here. Hello, Fit to be read. And the Wikibis says nature is
100% metal. I wrote a story that was in Nightmare magazine a few years back called the Fire and the Stag, and it was all about how nature is awful. So the main character is this guy who just doesn't like going out into nature at all, but his sister went missing on basically a camping trip, so he has to go out into nature to try to find her, and he hates it, and he has good reason to hate it. Everything, half the things in nature are trying to kill you, and the other half are just trying to like suck your blood. So like why nature is metal. What's the quote? Nature red in tooth and claw, right? It's brutal out there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we lose track of that now, because we get comfortable and we forget that everything is trying to kill us.
Yeah, well, we've manipulated ourselves to be at the top of the food chain, right? Through civilization, we don't live amongst the wild animals that could kill us. So you're absolutely right. I think we've probably gotten a little jaded.
The fungi are waiting for us to get more comfortable, then they'll spring their trap.
That's right. So I actually, instead of being reluctant to put mushrooms on my pizza, I should be putting more mushrooms on my pizza. I should be eating as many mushrooms as possible so that they don't take over.
Got to thin their ranks a little bit.
And they're delicious sauteed with garlic. So, I mean, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
I see that Andreas here is saying, if fungi can control humans, how do we know they didn't take you over to write The Hungry Earth to spread the gospel? Andreas, I don't know that they didn't. That's the whole thing. If I could be doped up with psilocybin right now and just dreaming all of this is happening, while at the same time fungi are making me write this book.
They just took over, and you read in the book that
right
used to take over.
Can you imagine if in the middle of our conversation on live on YouTube, like my eyes pop out and there's just like mushrooms
popping out? That would be a first. Yeah.
But think of the views.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't need. Yeah, I'm okay. Good. Let's keep the fungi at bay as we can.
I did know that Silvia Morena Garcia edited a fungus anthology, but I have not read it. And I'm glad I didn't read it yet because I didn't want it to influence what I was going to write. But fungus is in the zeitgeist. Absolutely. I mean, it's, as I mentioned before, it was in the very popular video game, The Last of Us. So it's definitely in the subconscious, in the sort of cultural subconscious.
Interesting. Kayla says, I actually love mushrooms. Mushroom pizza is my favorite.
Well, that's what the mushrooms want you to think, Kayla. Let's turn this into a conspiracy theory show. The mushrooms.
I'll never see mushrooms the same way again.
But again, I mean, I've been talking about mushrooms for half an hour now, and I know that I'm sure, as fascinating as it may be for some people, there are other people who are like, I thought they were going to talk about like horror and stuff.
Yeah. It is horror. It's very much horror. Yeah.
It's real life horror, especially if you're a cicada.
Yeah. There's no laughing matter to cicadas.
No.
They're not laughing.
We are actually going to get some angry YouTube comments from the cicada community.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, I broke Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to not laugh too loud because I don't want to drown everybody out. But so 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 how did you so what is it about horror that you enjoy? Because it's so strange to me because all the horror and pretty much everyone I've talked to has been friendly and everything, but it seems like all the horror authors are the nicest people around and they write these horrible, terrible, scary stories. So what is that? What's the where do you think that might come from?
I don't know. Maybe we get all the awful stuff out of us when we write it down. I don't know. But you're absolutely right. I've been writing horror professionally for 21 years now. So I've been to a lot of conventions and writers' conferences and stuff. And everyone's been really nice. Yeah. I mean, um, case in point, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Rath James White. It's very extreme horror, very lots of gore and violence and all that stuff. You'll never meet a nicer person in your life than Rath James White. He's very kind. Um, I've been absolutely blown away by how nice and welcoming I've always found the community of horror writers. As for why we're all nice people, I mean, I jokingly say maybe we get it all out on the page. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I suspect a lot of horror writers have the same background in that they probably felt a bit like outsiders growing up. I think horror is a bit more mainstream now, certainly, than it was when I was growing up in the 80s. I mean, there was a lot of horror in the 80s, obviously, but I mean, I wasn't making friends at school talking about horror movies.
No.
I think this is probably a little bit different now. But a lot of people, certainly of my generation or around or near my generation, I probably grew up feeling like an outsider, probably didn't know how to make friends, or just had very few friends. And as we got older and met sort of like-minded people who also loved horror and who probably also felt like outsiders a lot of their lives, we opened up to each other, and we became friendly with each other, or more than friendly with each other. We became a community. We became almost a family. So that's what I'd like to think is the reason why everyone's so nice.
That makes sense to me. And I would be curious to see because we had talked earlier about horror and popularity of horror, how it's changed over the years. I wonder if that has anything to do with the economics, what was happening during the time, and what the kind of the tone of the country as a whole, if that made any difference in how popular or not horror was, or even certain types of fiction.
I think maybe there is. I know that I mean, horror fiction and horror movies, horror stories have been around forever, but I think the times the times are reflected by what the horror is in those stories and in those films. Um, Looking back again at the 80s, which were my formative years, so I look at them fondly. But looking back at horror in the 80s, the big national fear, the real societal nightmare was nuclear war, right? We were all very worried about a nuclear war with what was then known as the Soviet Union. And it really seemed like at times we were really on the brink of it. Um, and so the horror was reflected in, well, you're no longer safe in your home the way you thought you were, right? Because nuclear fallout doesn't matter where you are. You could be on, on a field in a field or in your house. It's going to get you. So there was a lot of you got a lot of slashers and stuff like that in the 80s. You got a lot of um, Nightmare on Elm Street type things where you're not even safe in your own head, right? Because so it is reflected, I think, in the manner of horrors. Going back further, I mean, obviously with the 50s, where we were worried also very much about nuclear bombs, because World War II was so recent and Hiroshima and Nagasaki were so recent. All of the horror movies were about the dangers of radiation. Everyone, it was radiation is going to create monsters that will kill us. Well, what that really is in our minds is radiation is going to kill us. So I do think horror is always reflective of what the fears are at that time. And we saw it also in the early 2000s with, I think a lot of horror was really, I think the societal nightmare in the early 2000s was really formed by the terrorist attacks of 2001. So a lot of the horror that we got in the early 2000s was mob horror, right? We had a lot of movies about zombies, and they were fast moving zombies, and they were running after us, and they were chasing us in mobs. I think we were very frightened on an unconscious level of the other, of people who were not us, right? So that turned into zombies. So yeah, I think we're always horror will always reflect whatever is the major fear of that time.
That's very interesting. Andres says that the fear of nuclear war was also reflected in many song lyrics of the time.
I mean, who can forget 99 Red Balloons by Nina, right? I'm the only one who remembers it, I guess.
No, I think we all do. It's funny how though you would never if unless you really pay attention and know the history, you wouldn't think of it as being related.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you could write a whole thesis on the way that horror reflects and amplifies or distorts the major fears of society at the time when it is being created.
The World of Jay is just stopping by to say hi. He has a show, Paper Cuts, in half an hour. He's talking to Ali C, I believe, tonight with Brad Proctor, and we'll watch the rest later. Thanks for dropping by, Jay, and good luck tonight with Paper Cuts.
Good luck.
Yeah. And we talked about the 80s, and because there were crime waves in the 80s. I wonder if that had to do with slashers being so popular.
I don't know. I don't necessarily subscribe to the theory that art or any sort of creative endeavor specifically causes violence. I think it's a much larger picture where violence comes from. But I do think that pop culture is a part of it, but it's not the only part.
Seth says today's horrors, pandemics, and capitalism. I think economics and economic status, and of course now pandemics are a huge thing, and
we're gonna have so many virus novels and virus movies coming up soon. I think we'll need a little bit of time to pass first, because no one's going to go see a virus movie now. No one's really going to want to necessarily buy a virus book now. But give it 5-10 years, and we're going to see a ton of post-apocalyptic by way of virus. Definitely.
A little too close to home still.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a few more years. Yeah.
I mean, we're still sort of in the thick of it. I mean, here in the U.S., we're still losing almost 2,000 people a day. It's too soon to write. It's too soon to turn that into entertainment.
Yeah, and I know here in New Mexico we have mask mandates. I wear a mask all day long at work and whenever we're indoors. So yeah, it's still very much.
It's still with us.
Yeah, not ready for that yet to go on. I think part of that too is reflected in a lot of the war movies that were made in the last 20 years or so, because there was this fatigue with all the wars in the Middle East that a lot of those movies haven't done well.
It's true
as far as box office. I think people are just fatigued with that kind of thing. So
I remember when the movie Jarhead came out. I think it was right either during or right at the tail end of the second Gulf War. I remember thinking, I'm not ready to see this movie. It's too fresh in my mind. And to this day, I still haven't seen it. I think it just sort of slipped between the cracks, I guess. But I think that there are definitely movies that are too timely, or at
Mhm.
least I don't want to speak for everyone. Obviously, for me, I can be sensitive about certain topics, and I think for me it was too timely. Just as
Yeah,
for me, it would be too timely to go and see a virus movie now.
yeah. And Jarhead was interesting. That's the one with Jake Gyllenhaal, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was about Desert Storm. A lot of that movie was, um, I thought they explored things that you normally wouldn't expect in a war movie, but yeah, I can see that a lot of people just weren't interested because of the
yeah, yeah.
climate of the time. So
And The Hurt Locker. The Hurt Locker was an Oscar-winning movie, but I was like, I don't want to see this right now. And then it
mm,
turned into actually never seeing it. But
yeah,
one day, I promise you, Steve, I will see The Hurt Locker and Jarhead,
okay.
and I'll be
One of these
back on
days.
your show to talk about them.
Sure, yeah, I'm always ready to chat about anything. Uh, so, what is it about horror that you love? What is it? Is it being scared? Is it the unknown, or is what is it?
It's funny. I don't like being scared.
You don't?
It takes a lot to scare me. It's very rare I can be scared by something I read, but in movies, it also takes a lot to scare me. So when I see a movie that really does scare me, I'm like, why did I do that? why did I why did I put myself through that? I remember seeing, I think it was the first Paranormal Activity. I rented it and I watched it right before bedtime. And I think we all look back now at the Paranormal Activity movies as a franchise that really got played out. But that first one got under my skin. And so I was like, why did I watch this right before bedtime? What was I thinking? So I know that's one of the ones. I think The Ring also got under my skin, and
Yeah.
The Shining has always gotten under my skin. So it's not that I love being scared. I
Mm,
think what I like about it is the heightened reality of it.
mm,
Um, if I can divide horror for a moment into two,
mhm.
the supernatural and the non-supernatural, or the monster movie and the non-monster movie. I love monsters. I've always been a monster kid. I had like the classic Aurora models of monsters that I put together as a kid. Um, with the wolf man with like glow in the dark hands and stuff. It was wonderful. So I've always loved monsters. And so that's one of the things that drew me to both fantasy and horror, because there was a lot of fantasy coming out in the 80s, also fantasy movies,
Mhm.
and they all had dragons and trolls and ogres, and so I loved that too because they were monsters. um, so I love monsters. I love the fantasy of that, the dark fantasy of that aspect of horror, uh, of monsters and the supernatural, magic, demons, spells, incantations. All that stuff just lights a fire in my imagination, because that's just the way my imagination is, I guess. On the other hand, the other side of horror, where it's like it's non-supernatural, it's not monster, it's movies like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, or what have you. Um, what I like about those is that there's a sort of heightened sense of reality to them. Henry might not be the best example to use for this, because they tried to keep it very grounded. But even if it's just a slasher movie or a giallo or something like that, everything's just a little bit heightened, and that gives you a sense of distance from it. So even if it can be scary or thrilling, but there is that distance of it, the way you recognize, the human body doesn't do that. You can't squeeze somebody's head and it turns into a paper bag. You can't. Um, but because those things happen in horror movies, they feel fantastical. They don't feel real. It's the same reason, like I don't want to look at actual crime scene photos. I don't want to
Mhm.
see the end results of real violence or a real car accident or anything like that. I will be happy to watch the goriest horror movies you can imagine, but I don't want to see the real thing.
Mhm.
And so I think it's this sort of heightened reality of them that attracts me to it, because it's a way of sort of confronting my own fears about mortality or injury or
Mm.
getting maimed or whatever, from a safe distance. I know I'm watching a movie. I know I'm reading a book. And so there's that distance there that makes it much safer to do. Um, but I mean, the more fun answer is just that I love monsters,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I've I was a lonely kid, as I talked earlier about how a lot of us felt like outsiders. And so most of my weekends as a teenager were spent renting horror movies from my local video store, which was always a blast. And I was picking up movie after movie just based on um, cover art. Like, oh,
Yeah.
this looks interesting. Here's, a man with a machete and he's holding a severed head. I'll rent that, and so I saw a lot of really trashy movies, like movies that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but it all fed my imagination. Like it all just got in there because it was so over the top, because the gore was so clearly not real and not realistic, that it was almost like it was like watching a fantasy. It was fantastical.
Hmm.
And I've always been sort of attracted to this concept of the fantastical, which is, I guess, a weird thing to say when I kept the science so real, and in my latest book. But I've always sort of loved just the sort of the heightened wildness of certain horror movies. Like, I don't know if you would consider Gremlins a horror movie or not. We don't need to argue over whether it is. To me, it
Well,
is.
well, I would say so. Yeah, I would say it's a horror
Yeah, I
movie.
mean, to me, it
Yeah.
is because I'm a horror fan. I will be happy to own Gremlins in the horror category. Um, but this is a great example of just like wild imagination in a horror movie. Like this isn't just, I don't want to put down slashers, but it's not just some guy in a mask chopping people up. They came up with this whole concept. It's like world building, but with a creature. And I'm just so fascinated by stuff like that. I love stuff like that. And the darker the better, which is I guess why I'm more drawn to horror than to like epic fantasy.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's my very roundabout way of saying what draws me to horror. Um, I love monsters, and I love things that are the heightened reality of it all. I used to play with dinosaurs, with plastic dinosaurs when I was a kid, as I'm sure many children did.
Mhm.
And my mother told me once, like, the scarier the dinosaur, the better. Like I didn't want like some dopey little dinosaur. I wanted the ones that had like big teeth and horns and like crazy. So I've obviously been a monster kid my whole life.
Are there any movies from your childhood years that you watched? Any horror movies, or even just movies in general, that have been influential on you on your writing career? Like that you go back and rewatch that to look for story structure or characters or anything like that?
Yes. Um, so I don't know how familiar you are with the Hammer films, out of England, but all those Christopher Lee Dracula movies I return to time and time again. Now, most of the stuff I write is modern day, um, but there's just something about those films. I think it's just they are a complete package. Like there's the sets, the atmosphere, the costumes, all that stuff. And so I actually drew from those movies to write one of my earlier novels called In the Shadow of the Axe, which was actually, I think, reviewed in Locus as a Hammer film come to life, which I'm so glad
Hmm.
that they were able to spot that reference in there. So that one's sort of like it takes place in the 1800s in like a mountain town in Germany, just like the Dracula movies. And there's a castle up in the mountains, and there's not a vampire, but there's a necromancer that's sort of preying on the village. And so that was super fun. That was super fun to write, and super fun to pay homage to those Dracula movies. I wish I could tell you why exactly I'm just nutso for those movies, but I just am. I mean, Christopher Lee is Dracula to me. I think Bela Lugosi does a fantastic job. I think Gary Oldman does a fantastic job as Dracula, but Christopher Lee is my Dracula.
Huh. Yeah, I've never seen the was it '90s, was it Bram Stoker's Drag? I've never seen that movie, so
It's worth seeing. I think it's. I know my
you
voice went up
hesitated.
like
Yeah.
3 octaves, so
Yeah.
I think it is a beautifully made film. I don't know if it can withstand some of the choices it makes, but I do think it's worth seeing just on a purely visual level.
Hmm.
I watched a video right here on YouTube once, about all the filmed versions of Dracula, and they were comparing it to the book. to see which one is closest to the book. And believe it or not, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992 was one of the closest adaptations to the book, even though they had added this whole sort of silly subplot about Dracula's lost and reincarnated love, which is not in the book. The rest of the movie is very close to the book, which surprised me.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected that at all.
Yeah, I know, because it feels very different. I recently reread the book again. I think it was actually last October, and was just blown away about. It's an incredible novel. And if anyone out there watching this hasn't read Bram Stoker's Dracula yet, do yourself a favor. There you go.
I'm reading it this month.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
it's a great October read.
Yeah, yeah. We thought it was time to read it, so we're doing that this month.
Great.
Yeah, I know horror movies have become more popular the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. Have you watched any in that time period that you've really loved?
Absolutely. I've loved a lot of horror movies that have come out recently. I was blown away by Hereditary, but I think I saw it with the perfect audience. I went to go see it with a friend of mine, but behind us were three either teenagers or early 20-somethings, and they were into the movie. Every surprise, every revelation, they were gasping, they were knocking their popcorn out of their laps, and so that just made it such a wonderful experience. But I do think, just taken on its own too, it's a fantastic movie. The Witch, I thought, was great. The Lighthouse. I mean, it's a really it's an inscrutable film, The Lighthouse, but I still thought it was really well made and really well acted. It's, in my opinion, it's Willem Dafoe's best performance.
Wow,
he's incredible in that movie. I even liked Midsummer. Even it didn't hold any surprises for me because I'd already seen movies like The Wicker Man, so I sort of knew what was coming. But I thought it was extremely well made and extremely well acted. And at this point, I'll probably see any movie that Florence Pugh is in, because she blew me away in Midsummer.
she was excellent. Yeah,
she's fantastic. Yeah, and I actually just watched Black Widow. I finally saw Black Widow when it came to Disney Plus. And she's in that as well, and I think she makes that movie
watchable, or is it
just makes it, just is the best part of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never seen it, so I couldn't say. But you mentioned going to the movies. Do you miss going, or are theaters open there?
Yes, theaters are open here. Even though they are like, you have to wear a mask and you have to show proof of vaccination, I still don't necessarily feel like that's what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to stay in a room with a bunch of strangers for 2 hours to see a movie. I don't know. I'll get there. I'll get there eventually, because I do miss it. I do miss going to the movies. I was never a big fan of the crowds, especially here in New York City, where there are a lot of people who go to the movies here in New York City who think the theater is their living room. So they're checking their phones, or they're talking or whatever. So my wife and I would often go to matinees on the weekends. We would get up ridiculously early for a Saturday or Sunday, take a train from Brooklyn into Manhattan, and go see a matinee at like 10 in the morning or something. And they were a lot less crowded, and there was a lot fewer shenanigans going on. But I do miss it. I really miss it. I would love to see Halloween Kills on the big screen, because I saw Halloween in 2018 on the big screen. I'd like to continue that, but I just don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's weird that all the things that have happened in the last 2 years or so, and a lot of people wonder if the movie theater experience is over for most people. If that'll be, if movie theaters will go the way of a record store.
I don't think so. I don't think it will. I think it's too important to the culture of our country. People love to go to the movies on weekends. That's what they do. I think, and also think about, like, all the dates that are happening out there. If you have dinner and you go to a movie, it's not, it wouldn't be the same, and I think if nothing else, the dating population will keep movies going.
Yeah, because it's a good point. Yeah, it is dinner and a movie kind of.
Yeah, I mean, It's such a part of our culture. I really don't think it's going to go away. I think things like video stores went away because it was able to be replicated in a way that was even more convenient, which is streaming. Like, you could buy a video on demand. Um, but I don't think movie theaters can be replaced that way. And I think people will continue to go. Maybe the crowds will be less. Maybe there are a bunch of people who are like, you know what? I much prefer seeing a movie in the comfort of my living room than going to the theater. And I get that. But I don't think it's going to go away.
Josh Yak says, I'm generally not a moviegoer, but I'd really like to catch Dune when it's released.
I think that would be great on the big screen too.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably wind up seeing it on HBO Max instead. But I don't know. When is this all going to be over? I have no idea.
I don't
I have
know
no
if
idea.
it will be. Is there really an end in sight? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. And also, I guess it depends on how we define over, right? Because I don't think the actual virus is going anywhere. I think we're just going to have to learn to live with it, through mitigation, like, or vaccines. If enough of us get vaccinated, it'll become less powerful. But I don't know when things will get back to a sense of normalcy. If you had told me, by the way, in like March of 2020, that I would still basically, for the most part, be working from home and stuck in my apartment as we approach the end of 2021, I would not have believed you.
Yeah. No way.
It's funny. I don't want to talk about this too much because I know it's talking about the pandemic is a touchy subject with some folks.
Yeah.
But I remember in New York in the middle of March, we shut down for 2 weeks. They said we're going to shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it sort of grew and grew and grew. But I remember thinking, like, 2 weeks seems very optimistic. It'll probably be more like 4 weeks. it was pretty much indefinite.
That was very optimistic too. Yeah.
I also remember, so in New York, nationally, the CDC recommended that we started to use masks in April. And so I went online to like Amazon, and I ordered a box of surgical masks. And I got an email saying, oh, they're not going to ship until May 25th. And I was like, May 25th? We won't even need masks anymore by May 25th.
Well, here, Mark Spawn says, same. It looks amazing. I'm going to miss the movie. I miss
going to the movies. Yeah.
Sorry.
I think Mog Spawn is talking about Dune.
Dune.
And I do think Dune looks amazing. And I think that also might be my friend Alex Warner as Mog Spawn. But anyway, I do miss going to the movies. What movies have you seen recently that you've enjoyed?
Oh, I went to the movie theater for the first time a few days ago with my son wanted to see the new Venom movie. Yeah, it wasn't so great. But
I'm not really into Venom as a character. Like I wasn't reading Spider-Man during the Venom years, so
yeah,
I'm not really that familiar with them. But you did go to a movie theater. How was that?
It was a little uncomfortable. But it says, "Yep, hi Nick." Yeah, so
that's
right.
Yeah. Hey, Alex.
Yeah, it was. Well, there's no. We don't have to show proof of vaccination, but you do have to wear a mask, so it was a little uncomfortable. And like you said, it's just not a great experience when you have to wear a mask the whole time, and you can take it off while you eat and while you drink, but it's just not. It's just you don't feel all that comfortable.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, there was a period of time when we didn't have an indoor mask mandate for a little while there, and we did see A Quiet Place 2, and that was another bummer. So we kind of
I missed that one. I'll check it out eventually. I did enjoy the first one, so I'll check out the second one.
Yeah, it was okay though. But yeah, so it's really strange how our lives have changed. And has the pandemic and this experience changed the way that you write stories, or your writing process, being home so much?
Yes and no. I actually wrote The Hungry Earth during 2020, which surprised me because I spent a lot of months in 2020 not being able to write at all. But then I think when I read Entangled Life, it just lit such a fire that the novel came out. But about a month or so ago, I'm currently writing the sequel. the sort of further adventures of the surviving characters of this novel. And about a month or so ago, I just hit a wall where I realized, oh my God, I've been basically living out of my apartment and looking at just these same four walls for 17 months, and I couldn't write anymore. I just hit that wall and I was like, I can't. So I basically had to just sort of give myself permission to step away from the writing of this book for however long it took, and just sort of get myself back to the baseline. So I took some time off. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I watched some movies. I watched, I streamed TV shows and whatnot, just to sort of get my head back. And only recently, like only this week, have I been able to start writing again.
Wow.
Which has felt so triumphant and so good. But yeah, I mean, it's the pandemic may have taken a toll on me creatively, but it's also taken a toll on hundreds, if not thousands, of other creators, whether they're writers or painters or playwrights or YouTube content creators. This has been a very difficult time for anyone who has tried to be creative, because on some level, there's a part of our brains that's still waiting for another shoe to drop. Even if we don't know what that shoe is, we're still in that state of anxiety. And it's very hard to be creative when you're not, when you're in a state of anxiety. So I feel very lucky that it actually came back to me this week. And I hope it sticks with me. And I hope one day I'm able to go back to the New York Public Library, which is where I used to do a lot of my writing. I would believe it or not, I loved having a commute, because that was when I was getting most of my reading done. So I would take the train into Manhattan. I would go to the main branch of the New York Public Library in Midtown, the one I call the Ghostbusters branch. It's the one that's in Ghostbusters with the lions out front. And I would do my writing there. And I haven't been there since January or February of 2020.
Has it been closed, or have you just not been able to
It's
go?
been closed for a lot of that time. It's open now. And I think you can go there, but you have to wear a mask the whole time. And I've certainly gotten used to wearing masks. That's not a big deal to me, but it just seems like a lot. It seems like, because I have to wear a mask on the subway too, so it just seems like a lot of mask wearing. So I'd rather just work from home until things are better.
Yeah. Well, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers
Let's
crossed.
Let's talk about more fun things. I feel again like we're bumming out your audience talking about the pandemic. Let's talk about fun things like mass murder and slashers
and horror and fungi taking over cicadas.
That's a lot more fun.
Finding world domination. Yeah.
I do have a bit of good news. I found out this week that The Hungry Earth is both a Amazon and Barnes and Noble bestseller.
Oh wow!
Ooh, an ebook anyway. Yeah, that was great news.
Do you use a publisher, or do you self-publish?
I use a publisher. I've only self-published one thing, which was a chapbook. I paid somebody $75 to format it for me, and I haven't made that money back yet.
Really?
So yeah.
Wow.
But it's just a little chapbook. It's not like a novel, so I think fewer people are probably interested in it. But that's the only thing I've ever self-published. I've always used a publisher before. This one is published by Crossroad Press, whom I've worked with before. In fact, they were the ones who published In the Shadow of the Axe, which is the one that I based so heavily on those Dracula movies. So they're a great publisher. They're a small press. I've worked with them a few times, and I'm happy to be with them again. As you can see, I mean, they did a great job with the cover, and so it's hard not to get a glare.
Yeah, it's a cool cover though, and
it really is.
When you use a publisher, do you have certain controls over the content, or if they bring an idea to you and say we think this should be changed? Do you have?
Yeah, sure. Every publisher will bring you some form of edits. And most of the time they're spot on. I mean, we writers can certainly think that something we've written is great, and then someone else will read it and be like, it's not as great as you think. Yeah. That happens quite a lot. So yeah, we every novel gets edits, and you do have freedom within those edits. You know, most of the edits are good, and some of them may not make sense to you. Like Why would I change this word or this sentence? Why would I remove this paragraph when I think it's very important? And usually that's fine. You know, you got to pick your battles though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
But I
And
did have a lot
like,
of input on the cover, which was a
oh,
lot of
okay.
fun. Yeah.
That was my next
Not
question.
every publisher will do that. But I have an agent who usually tries to get it into the contract that it will at least be run by me before it's final.
So do you send it out to different publishers and they come back to you and say, yes, we're interested in publishing your book, and kind of go from there? Or how does that process work?
Actually, my agent does that.
Your agent. Okay.
Yeah, I send my books. Usually, here's how the process works. I'll write a book. I'll write a manuscript. I'll send the manuscript to my agent. He'll send it back to me and say this is terrible. I'll rewrite it according to his notes. He'll send it out, and we'll find a publisher with it.
Hmm.
It works exactly the way that I had always been told it works. If you get an agent, they'll send it out. They have the contacts at other publishing houses to know which editor to put your book in front of.
Oh, okay.
And that's how you sell a book. But it took me a long time to find an agent, and I'm very happy I did, because he's a great guy and he's done a lot for me. So if there are any aspiring writers out there who want to go the traditional route rather than self-publish, I would definitely recommend trying to find an agent, because they will get the best deal for you that they can.
Hmm. If an aspiring writer came to you and asked you for advice, what advice would you give them? And say, I've never written. I'm just starting to write. What would you tell them if they asked you for advice?
I needed to refresh myself before I get into this.
Okay. Yeah.
No, what I would tell them is stick with it. I would tell them perseverance is 99% of being a successful writer, or a success in any creative endeavor. You have to stick with it. It's very easy to get frustrated because nothing you write or nothing anyone writes is perfect from the start. You know what I mean? Like if you sit down to write the first chapter of a first novel, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to probably be a mess. But you have to stick with it. And you have to keep working at it, rewriting, and just don't give up. Just keep writing. I'm one of those writers who firmly believes that every word you write makes you a better writer, even if that word gets deleted later on when you're editing. Or everything you write makes you a better writer. It's a muscle. You have to just keep using it, and don't get discouraged, because it's so easy to get discouraged. Your first story will probably not find a home. It probably won't get published. It could, certainly. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but the odds are that your first story isn't going to be your best work, but your 100th story is going to be great. And, you got to keep working at it. Like any skill. It's like any skill. But I think sometimes people get the idea that writing is magic. You sit down. Well, you know what it is? It's because of movies and television. Whenever there's a character who's a writer, they're like, I'm going to write a novel now. And then in the next episode, the book is finished and it's out and it's a bestseller, right? It doesn't work that way at all. There's a lot of work when you're writing a book. It could take, some of my books have taken 2 to 3 years to write, because I just had to because I kept getting it wrong. Basically, I had to work through all the wrong versions until I got the right version. And some books don't sell at all. Some stories don't sell at all. It can be a very discouraging business, but I promise you, aspiring writers, if you stick with it, you will get success at some point. And that's, by success, I mean published. Because that's the other thing I would tell people, is that there's not a lot of money in this game. I know, again, in movies and television, every writer character is a bestseller and, is living a glamorous life, and their publishers are putting on these big parties for their latest book. And for most of us, it's not like that at all. For most of us, most professional writers have another job, or are lucky, like me, to have a spouse with another job, a spouse with a job that pays regularly and that has me on her insurance. So it's a tough business. There's not a lot of financial reward, but there's so much emotional reward, especially when you hear from your readers. That's the most magical thing for any writer, is to get an email or a message on Facebook or something, where there's just someone just reaches out and says, you know what, I read your latest book and it was great. It really touched me. We love hearing that. And it means so much to us. And I think readers are sometimes afraid to do that. They don't want to reach out to the writer because they think, oh, who am I? Or I don't want to bother them. This would just bother them. No, it's not bothering us. We need that kind of feedback because writing is a very solitary business. It's you and your computer, or you and your notepad if you're one of those writers who writes by longhand. And so we get so little feedback from readers. And I never want to rely on going to Goodreads or to look at Amazon reviews as my feedback. I'd much rather hear directly from a reader that my book meant something to them, because that just means so much to me. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know every writer wants that kind of feedback.
Josh Yak says that is a striking cover.
It is. And once again, it was the art is by David Dodd at Crossroad Press. Who put it together, I guess, on his computer, or either that or he found a skull somewhere and grew some mushrooms in it. I don't know.
I hope he didn't read the book first. He might be part of this whole plan the fungi have. Andres says, my paperback copy of The Hungry Earth ships tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Andreas. I appreciate it, and I hope you like it.
Yeah, definitely. It is funny that because I think most readers do think, well, who am I? I don't want to bother them, and I don't want to, they don't care what I think. But it's funny to hear that from you.
But we do care what you think, especially. I know it sounds dumb, but especially if you liked it, we do want to know. We want to know less if you didn't like it, but
yeah, exactly.
It's a whole different world now. It's so much easier to contact your favorite authors. Most of them will have some form of contact on their websites, or maybe you're friends with them on social media and can send them a message. Back when I was young, you had to hunt down an address and write up a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and just hope it got to them.
Cross your fingers and never know if it did or not.
And yeah, because they're probably not they may not write back, or they might. But it's so much easier now. You can just reach out so easily and say, hey, I loved your latest book. Oh my God, it really spoke to me. And there's nothing like that for a writer. That's the best part of this job.
Do you read your reviews on Goodreads? Different review, whether they're positive or negative, do you read them?
Because I'm a fool, yes. I've been lucky that I haven't gotten any really outrageous reviews on Goodreads. I've seen outrageous reviews on Goodreads where 1 star, my book was bent when it came, or 1 star, this book is too expensive. Luckily that has not happened to me, but I've also had some reviews where I'm like, really? But you got to take the good with the bad. There are good reviews there too, and but not every book can be for everyone. Not every book is everyone's cup of tea, and sometimes it just doesn't work for someone.
What are your thoughts on Goodreads and Amazon? It seems like, because I'm pretty new to the reading community, and it seems weird to me that Goodreads has so much. It feels like they have a lot of power over influence over readers, over potential readers, because they might check Goodreads and the average score might be 3.5 stars, and think, well, I'll pass. It seems like that system has a lot of influence, almost too much. Is that?
It's a flawed system. It's a flawed system, and maybe it does have too much influence. It has not nearly as much influence as Amazon reviews. Amazon is still, like it or not, the major retailer for books online. And Amazon reviews can really help a book move and find its audience. I don't know if Goodreads has that same kind of power. I know that there are lots of booktubers who use Goodreads, either to rate their own books or to find books that they want to read. So it does have that kind of influence. But in terms of book sales, I think really Amazon reviews is where it's at, for better or ill. That's what has the most power. But which is also it's too much power. I mean, because there's no policing the reviews, right? So you hear stories all the time of people giving bad reviews to books because, I don't know, they don't like that a book is written by somebody of a particular race or something, right? So it can get pretty sticky. And that happens on Amazon and Goodreads.
Mhm.
I have plenty of friends who will not read their reviews on Goodreads, and I 100% understand why. But I think I'm such a dope for feedback that I do read them.
Huh.
And
And
like I said, I've been pretty lucky in that regard, and that they haven't been too outrageous.
and Saf mentions Amazon owns Goodreads. They own
Yes,
everything.
yes. Goodreads was originally independent, and it was bought by Amazon a few years back, maybe more than a
Oh,
few now.
part of the machine now.
Amazon does own everything.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. It's true.
It is
And
crazy.
I was
It's a
curious.
monopoly, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was curious on YouTube videos and YouTube reviews. Do you notice if somebody gives a really positive and glowing review on YouTube? Do you notice a spike in sales, or vice versa? If you have a negative review, do you notice a drop in sales?
I don't know.
Yeah.
None of my books have been reviewed on YouTube. As far as I,
Hmm.
oh no, that's not true. That's not true. My previous book, 100 Fathoms Below, that I co-wrote with Stephen L. Kent, got a couple of BookTube reviews, um, and I don't know how influential they were. They were sort of lesser known booktubers. I don't think they had necessarily very large followings. Um, but I will tell you what did set that book off, and it was a bestseller for a while on Amazon, was a viral tweet.
Hmm.
I wrote it. So talking about Goodreads, I wrote a tweet. I saw a review of 100 Fathoms Below on Goodreads, and I wrote this tweet saying, "My apologies to the Goodreads reviewer who found my novel about vampires on a submarine to be unrealistic." And this thing went viral. It had 100,000 retweets, 100,000 likes. It was crazy, and that made the book skyrocket.
Really?
Yes, this. I mean, Twitter's already considered ancient in terms of social media, but a tweet that went viral sold books.
Wow.
No one was more surprised than me. I think we sold something like 2,000 ebooks after
Wow.
that. I mean, that's incredible.
Hmm.
All
Do you
because of
know?
some dumb tweet
Yeah.
about Goodreads, no less.
Do you notice do you notice more sales in ebooks than paperbacks these days, or
I have been
is it about the
noticing
same?
that,
Is
yes.
it?
Um, the sales numbers on Amazon and Barnes and Noble for The Hungry Earth are great in ebook and sort of meh in paperback.
Hmm.
So I think price point has a lot to do with it. I think books have gotten very expensive in paper, and for the most part, ebooks are still affordable.
Hmm.
But I mean, most paperbacks now are like anywhere from $15 to $20. And not to be the oldest man in the room here, but back in my day, I remember being able to buy a mass market paperback for 3 and a quarter,
Hmm.
right? And so I could, or less. So if I had my $5 or $10 allowance for the week, I could buy a couple of books. Now mass market paperbacks are at least $8 or $9, and it's getting too much.
Yeah,
And so people are really gravitating towards the lower price point of ebooks. And also, not for nothing, but people have limited space too in their homes.
it's true.
And you can have a million books on your Kindle, and it takes up no extra space. And
Put it in your
that's really
pocket.
something.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of it is a lot of it too, or I wonder how much of it is instant. I want it. I want to read it now. I don't want to wait for it to get shipped. I want it
Yeah,
now,
it
which is
definitely
fine.
is impulse buys, especially if it's a low enough price point. People are like, oh, I saw this viral tweet about 100 Fathoms Below, and now I see that it's actually on sale for 99 cents. Of course, I'm going to snatch it up.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe they won't even read it for a year or two. That happens also. I mean, I know I buy books and then I don't get to them for a year or two.
Oh, I've
Uh,
never done that.
we're not in my bedroom right now. If we were, I would show you my TBR pile, which is actually 4 or 5 piles on top of my dresser, and they're just teetering towers of books.
Yeah, it gets out of control fast.
It does, and each new book I buy, I'm like, this is the one I'm going to read next. But then there's another one that I've been, and this one and that one, and after a while, it just It's funny because it means that I read very few books in the year that they come out,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
is unfortunate.
And Derry says, speaking for myself, shipping is the killer. I live in, I believe, New Zealand, so ebooks are absolutely the way to go.
Understood. Yeah.
Mhm.
By the way, New Zealand looks beautiful. I've only seen it in pictures, but it looks absolutely gorgeous there, and I would love to visit one day.
Definitely. Seth says that's why my most shopped at bookstores are Dollar Tree and the thrift shop.
I don't blame you, man. I mean, there's a website called bookoutlet.com,
Yeah.
which is mostly remaindered books. So you can get a hardcover for something like $5. But it's a book that came out 6 years ago, uh, if you don't mind that. And it's, the money probably doesn't get to the authors.
And the covers are way better too. The covers are way cooler. Yeah. And the rest
What is
says
this?
Goodreads. Goodreads allows you to compare the lists of books you've reviewed and other reviewers' lists and show you how much percentage you have in common.
Oh, so that's a good way to make new friends online.
Yeah, that's actually got me into trouble because I start following authors that I've read their books, and then I look at their list and then I add it to my list and then it leads to more book buying that I never get to. So
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Darius says shipping impacts the entire reading culture in New Zealand. That no retailer would take a risk on buying an unknown for stock.
Of course.
So only established authors are in stores, limiting secondhand stock too.
I understand that. In fact, it's not actually that different here in the US. If if you go into most bookstores, because they're, a lot of them are chains or are independent. The independent ones are pretty small. It's basically just bestsellers and name authors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's very hard to break into bookstores these days. Barnes and Noble, in particular, I'm gonna let you in on a terrible secret about Barnes and Noble here. If you don't pay them co-op fees, they will not stock your book. Meaning, if you do not pay them to have your book on a front table or an end cap or some other display, the odds of them stocking it are very low. And that's horrible because there are a lot
Hmm.
of publishers out there working on a real razor thin margin, and they just can't afford to pay co-op fees to Barnes and Noble.
What kind of, is it a percentage or what usually what
No,
kind of,
it's a you
like a
pay
flat?
them. It's a fee.
Oh, okay.
It's a fee. Here's, our co-op fee of, you have to pay us X amount of dollars, and we'll make sure your book is on that table in the front of the store, that
Oh,
kind of stuff. And if you don't pay to play, they may not stock your book at all. It's horrible.
wow.
That's it's no good for a lot of publishers, but it's good
Wow.
for the big publishers can do it. Macmillan or Random House or what have you can easily just fork over $500 or whatever it is, 1,500, whatever, and make sure their books are stocked because they know that they'll get a return on that investment.
Hmm. Well, I had no idea that happens.
I'm spilling the tea here, Steve.
Yeah. Andres says 100 Fathoms Below had a hardcover edition.
Yes, it did. Yes. Yes. It was actually my first book to ever have a trade hardcover.
Hmm.
I was very proud of that. But hardcovers don't sell very well. If a hardcover
Hmm.
can cost anywhere from $25 to $35. So you're not going to move a lot unless you're, obviously, Stephen King's hardcovers are going to move. Big name authors are going to move books. But a hardcover from somebody who's a list author like myself, maybe a few hundred copies.
Wow. I
Yeah.
would think hardcovers would sell more because it seems like hardcovers are more sought after, but I guess that's not really the case.
They're more sought after by collectors and bibliophiles, but most people who read books are not those.
Hmm.
Most people, I saw a study that said most book readers in the US read one or two books a year, which is nuts.
Interesting.
I'm a voracious reader. I couldn't imagine only reading one or two books a year.
Yeah.
But they buy a book that they want to read on vacation, right? And that's when they do their reading.
Or when they're in a plane ride somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh, I'm spilling all kinds of depressing tea now.
Piping
Piping
hot
hot
tea.
tea.
Yeah. So Derry has a good question. How can we as readers help this though? Booktube exists, and I always make recommendations. Good
You know
question.
what? The thing that still sells books more than anything else is word of mouth.
Hmm.
So if you tell your friends about a book that you like, that does wonders. That's more powerful than you can imagine. And you're doing that on BookTube. You are a trusted source to all of your viewers. So if you say, I love this book, they're probably, I'd say a good portion of them are going to pick it up. So that's really the most powerful marketing tool any book has, is word of mouth. People telling their friends that they really like this book and that they should read it too.
Derry says 1 or 2 a year. Geez, a good week is 3 or 4.
Oh, Derry, I wish I was able to read as fast as you. I average about 30 books a year because I'm a pretty slow reader, unless I have my commute back, in which case I can read probably a book in about 2 weeks, a week or two take per book.
With the and we won't, not to get back to the pandemic, but I was curious with the pandemic and people at home, and I think from what I've heard some people mention that there was a lot more self-published books being released in this time period because people were home and they thought, well, I'm home, I can write my book.
Yes.
Is that something you've seen or you've noticed just from in the business?
It's not something I noticed, but it is something that makes a lot of sense to me. I could see that. I spoke earlier about how it could be difficult to be creative during a time like this, but obviously that's not the case for everyone. And I think there were some people who were like, "Well, I'm stuck at home. I can't do my job, or I've lost my job, unfortunately, or what have you. And I've been home. I'm going to be home all these months. I can finally write my memoir. I can finally write that novel I've been meaning to write. I can finally put together my family cookbook or whatever." And so they do it. More power to them. They do it, and then they upload it to Kindle or whatnot, and hopefully it'll find an audience. But who knows? It's the thing that self-publishing and traditional publishing have in common is that you still just never know if your book is going to find its audience. So many don't. It's really sad.
It's really scary.
Yeah, when you think about it, this is a ridiculous industry. Like we put so much work and put so much of ourselves into our product, into books, and you just never know if they're going to be found and read. Which is again why I think we love so much hearing from our readers. If we hear from a reader that the book meant something to them, that even if they just really enjoyed it, that's like the little bit of fuel that keeps us going, that makes us continue doing this.
And for aspiring writers, do you recommend any resources online and any kind of ways they can hone their craft?
That's a good question, because it's been a while since I was sort of an aspiring writer, and so I think all of those resources have changed since then. I would definitely consider joining some sort of writing organization. Maybe it's the science fiction writers or mystery writers or the horror writers, and just sort of meet people that way, get to be part of the community that way. And through meeting those people and learning from them and learning with them sometimes, I think you'll find your way to the resources that you need. That's the best I can offer. Like I back in my day, we had an actual physical book called the Writer's Marketplace or something like that. And the minute it was published, it was already out of date, right? But it was the only resource we had. I'm sure there are much more timely ones online, especially if you're looking for agents. I think there are websites out there that can help you find an agent. And again, I do think that if you want to go the traditional route, finding an agent is the best thing you can do.
For someone looking for an agent, what should they avoid? What would be a red flag for someone looking for an agent?
2 main red flags. One would be any sort of fee, any sort of, if they charge you for a reading fee or anything like that, avoid them, because that means they're making money through fees, not through selling books. Your book will wind up probably just sitting on their desk. The second thing is you always want to get references. You want to reach out to that agent's other authors and say, hey, do you enjoy working with this agent? Have they been a good agent for you? Would you recommend them? And any agent that says, I don't want you talking to my other authors for references, that's a big red flag, because that means that they're not going to have good things to say about that agent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely a red flag.
So definitely, but also there are still some unscrupulous agents out there who charge fees, and odds are That's how they're making their money rather than selling your book.
Hmm. When you're writing a story or when you're watching or reading a story, what makes a character compelling?
That's very funny that you asked that. I was actually thinking about that recently.
Hmm.
Why do I like certain characters and not like other characters, or just think other characters are boring? And I think it comes down to emotional connection. If you can have an emotional connection with the character, there are characters that are funny, or you might like a character because they make you laugh. But I think even that is, on a certain level, is an emotional connection. Um, so if there's a character who's just sort of two-dimensional, right? Think of the worst slasher movie you've ever seen, and it's just a bunch of like dumb teenagers, smoking pot in the woods or whatever, and you're like, these characters are stupid. These characters, I'm not feeling anything for these characters, and the reason is because there's no impetus there to build an emotional bridge between yourself and them. They're not giving you anything that real people would give you. So to make that emotional bridge happen, you have to know more about the character. If you want to be emotionally attached to them, you need to know more. So that's where backstory comes in, right? You can do a lot more backstory, obviously, in a novel than you can do in a movie.
Hmm.
But if you have a compelling backstory for a character, and you can really touch somebody on an emotional level with that backstory, then you're going to like that character. And if they have no backstory, if they're just there to smoke pot and get their head chopped off, you're going to be like, whatever, which I think, interestingly enough, is why we side so often with characters like Freddy or Jason, because we
Hmm.
know them better by the sixth movie or whatever than we know the characters that they're killing. Right. So now we're siding with them because we know them better. We know Jason's backstory. He's some kid who drowned in a lake, or maybe didn't drown and lived in the woods. Who knows? But we we know him over the course of all these movies. We know Freddy's backstory. We know his sense of humor and his personality over the course of all these movies. And that's what makes them good characters to us, because now we are emotionally connected to them.
Hmm.
So if you can do that with a character in a novel, or hopefully all your characters in a novel, that's the dream, right? That to have a reader just really connect with your characters. Again, it's much harder to do in movies because you have a limited amount of time, and not always the best way to show backstory. But in novels, you have sort of an unlimited way to do it. And so that's the dream. And I tried to do that a lot in The Hungry Earth. I gave a lot of backstories to a lot of characters, and I hope that readers really respond to them and like them.
Hmm. And Derry has a comment. Another good way to get yourself out there: do booktube interviews. Thanks, Derry. The Hungry Earth will be auto delivered
Oh,
wirelessly.
thank you, Derry. Thank you for
Awesome.
ordering. I really appreciate that. And you're not wrong. I mean, I'm really enjoying talking with Steve right now, and hopefully people out there in YouTube land are enjoying this as well and will consider buying the book.
Definitely, yeah. And it's kind of, almost, you mentioned being emotionally attached to characters, and we talked a little bit before we went live on the stream about fandoms and
Yeah.
how people become emotionally attached to entertainment. So, I know it's kind of a repeat for us because we talked about it, but for the audience, what were your thoughts on fandoms and what creates those kind of rabid fan bases?
Right. I think what I mentioned before was that um, the reason people become so rabid about a particular fandom is because they were introduced to that fandom at a time when they were very open to it. Usually, if they were very young, or even if they were older, but it spoke to them on some level, and so that creates an emotional attachment to that property. And if that property gets, in their view, attacked, even criticized, um, they explode. Right? How dare you attack or criticize this thing that means so much to me? It's not rational, but it's very, very human, and so
Hmm.
that's why you have people. Um, I don't know. A good example maybe is Cowboy Bebop. Right? Cowboy Bebop is
Hmm.
this great uh, anime from, I want to say the 90s, but I'm not entirely sure. And now it's being remade in live action on Netflix, and there are a lot of people that are excited about it. But there are also people who are like, no, don't don't do this because it's going to ruin my emotional connection to this property if I see it done wrong, to what I feel will be wrong. And so, like I said, it's not rational, but it's very, very human.
Very interesting. The way people get it. It seems like maybe it's just because I've been getting older and I notice these things more often, but it seems like that's gotten worse over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years with like franchises like Star Wars and there's a few other ones that even a lot of it too is I notice superhero movies like if you don't like a certain movie, people will get upset and how dare you not like such and such movie.
I have a friend who didn't like Black Panther and didn't feel comfortable talking about how he didn't like Black Panther because all the rest of us loved Black Panther. So I know what you mean. I think the reason it feels more prevalent now is because we're hearing it more now. People are taking to their social media and they're tweeting out, oh, this is dumb or that's dumb or leave my childhood alone. And normally you and I wouldn't even see that tweet. We wouldn't even see that Facebook post, but it gets picked up and retweeted, or it gets picked up by the media, right? Oh, well, fans are outraged and now we have to see all these quotes. There was a time when we didn't have to, right? So just as Saf says now, social media made them louder. And that's absolutely true. You could go back to a time before social media. Let's say you're a Doctor Who fan. You go back to the 80s or 90s when they had the creation conventions. They always had Doctor Who stuff there and fans would congregate. And they would talk about, oh, I don't like Colin Baker at all. The show's ruined, right? It's the same thing. But back then they didn't have the amplifying technology of social media. So now, because we're all hooked into social media, we have to listen to them. Right? We have to hear them. And in the old days, before social media, we didn't have to listen to them.
Nobody cared. Yeah.
No,
Nobody cared what I thought.
Nobody cared. I don't think anybody really cares now. Like you know what? If you don't like Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, that's fine. I don't care. I don't need to hear your diatribe. I just don't care that you don't like this actor.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Jerry says social media helped them find each other too. Fans have always created fan groups, but now the haters do too.
Unfortunately, very true. I'm sure you can find Facebook groups in particular for all kinds of stuff that would just turn your hair gray. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Kind of a shifting gears here, but do you have a favorite author?
I do, and I'm lucky enough to know him.
Oh,
My
wow.
favorite author is Peter Straub. He's here in New York, and I'm lucky enough to have met him on numerous occasions and to call him, if not friend, then friendly acquaintance. We talk a lot, not as much as we used to, but we talk a lot on social media, and I got to hang out with him a few times pre-pandemic. And he's such a great guy, such a nice guy, very open, very, very approachable. But the first time I met him, I froze up. I just clammed up. I used to be a smoker, and I was having a cigarette outside at a convention. And he was also a smoker back in those days. And he sort of came outside also to have a cigarette and was standing right near me. And what a perfect opportunity to be like, oh, hello, Mr. Straub. I really enjoy your work. But instead, I was a statue. I couldn't. I just froze. My heart was pounding. I'm sure I was sweating. I was probably a mess. He was probably inching away from me, like, who's this weirdo?
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it. I was just too shy and too overcome. But I'm so glad that I had an opportunity to fix that later and actually get to talk to him and get to know him and to become friendly with him. I think his work is outstanding. I think a lot of people probably know him best from his collaborations with Stephen King on The Talisman and its sequel, The Black House. But his own work is just, it just put me over the moon. It's so literary and it has so many layers to it. And his best known solo book is probably Ghost Story, and it's a classic for a reason. It's so good and so different, by the way, from the movie. The movie is a very different beast from the book. The book is so much richer and just so layered and just beautiful. He's an incredible writer. I wish I had. This is going to sound like I'm self-deprecating, but I'm not. I wish I had half his talent. I really do. He's incredible. and his books are so human, so humane. His characters really, it's not just that violence happens to them, it's that they are outraged that violence has happened to people they love. And it's just incredible. He's such a good writer. He had a book recently, I say recently, it's probably 15 years old now, called In the Night Room, which was not just a great novel, but had within it such a great concept, especially to me as a writer, that it has stuck with me ever since I read it. And the concept is this: every book that is published during the printing phase experiences a cosmic accident, and one copy is published of the book that is the perfect version of the book that was in the author's mind when he first started to write it. And that is such a beautiful concept, because I know as a writer, as I'm sure any writer watching this knows, ideas come to you and they feel so perfect and so beautiful, and you start to write them down, and they're not as perfect on the page. Like something's missing, it's not working the same way or whatever, but in your head it was so perfect. And so this idea that there's a cosmic accident and one copy of every book is that perfect version that the author originally had in their head that finally gets out into the world is so beautiful that it has stuck with me ever since.
What advice have you asked him, Peter? What advice have you asked him during the time that you've known him? For what have you asked him, or what advice has he given to you that you've
I'm not
really
sure I ever
took with
asked
you?
him for advice. I probably should have. I don't think I ever felt comfortable talking about writing with him so much as just being like, I love your writing, Peter, you know. um, but I have heard him in interviews talking about writing. And one of the things that I really like about what he has to say about writing is that it's also personal to him. He draws so much from his own life, even the things that are painful, even the things that perhaps you and I wouldn't want to share with other people. He draws from, and he uses them as material. Um, for one example is that he was in a terrible accident when he was a child. He was hit by a car. Um, and first they didn't think he was going to live, and then they didn't think he was going to walk again. And he did live and he did walk. But he used that in one of his novels. He shared that um, I think it was his novel, Mystery. The title of the novel is Mystery. Um, uh, and, uh, and it's just, I think we all writers draw on their lives to some extent, but he really digs deep, pulls it out, and puts it on the page.
Hmm.
And I have such a huge amount of respect for that.
Darius says that makes me feel so much less weird. I think she's referring to you when you ran into him outside and you're both smoking.
I guess it makes for a good story. But at the time, I was really kicking myself. Like, why didn't you say something?
I think it's just when you meet someone like that, it's hard to approach them because
Yeah.
again, you think, well, who am I? I don't want to bother them.
I don't want to bother them, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, it's not like I'm coming up to them in a restaurant and interrupting their meal. He was just standing there, like I could have easily said something, and I was just too shy. And I hope never to repeat that process with anyone else.
So how did you approach him? How did you finally get to know him? What was that ice breaking moment?
We shared a bottle of vodka at a convention. I was just lucky to be in the right room at the right time. We shared a bottle of vodka. I should say, I had probably one shot of vodka, and he probably had the rest. Um, but it was a really fun time, and there were so many other great writers who were in that room as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Jack Ketchum. Um, he passed away unfortunately a few years back, but he was there too, and just so many other just great. Yes, Derry is correct in saying there's nothing better for bonding than booze. I'm not. I don't have the tolerance I used to, and I think a lot of that also has to do with being stuck at home during the pandemic. But it was a good time. I haven't seen Peter in a while, obviously because of the pandemic, but I hope I have a chance to again.
Josh Shiak
Uh,
says every great author gets hit by a vehicle. Just ask Stephen King.
Too soon, Josh. Too soon. I remember that. What was that? 99 when that happened?
Yeah,
Um,
it's been a little while, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember hearing the news and not understanding what had happened. So I talked to a friend of mine. I said, I heard Stephen King was sick. And he said, no, he got hit by a car and almost died. I was really
Oh,
surprised.
yeah, it's awful. Um,
But he pulled through. And that also affected his writing, as I recall. Um,
yeah.
that sort of near-death experience put a new lens on a lot of his work.
Yeah, I think he was motivated to finish The Dark Tower, if I'm not mistaken. After that, he kind of reevaluated his priorities, and
He realized that he doesn't have all the time in the world, and that's
yeah,
it's a valuable lesson for all of us, to follow your dreams because you just don't know what's going to happen.
yeah, every day is a gift for sure. Do you leave secrets or Easter eggs in your books for readers to find?
Sometimes I don't want to give any away, but it is something I've learned from both Peter Straub and Stephen King, is to
Hmm.
sometimes mention characters from other books, not as necessarily major players in this book or anything like that, or just mention a town that was from another book or something like that. But what I'd mostly do is name characters after friends,
Hmm.
some of whom are also writers.
And kill them
Um,
horribly, or
no,
okay,
sometimes, yeah, I guess so.
sometimes.
Sometimes. Um, my friend Brian Keene is a writer, and he wrote a 4-issue comic book back in, I think, the early 2000s for Devil Slayer. For I think I can't remember if it was Marvel or DC, but they were putting out a new bunch of like a Max line where it was going to be like sort of bringing back these old characters, and so he got
Hmm.
to write for Devil Slayer, which is a great old time character that I actually had never heard of before. But he named one of his characters Isaac Kaufman,
Hmm.
as sort of a nod to me. So I sort of got him back. In my novel, Dying is My Business, there's an Isaac Keene.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And then there's my friend Jack Haringa, who I put his name in everything. Um, and a bunch of us who are friends with him and our writers use his name or kill him. We kill him regularly in our stories. So it's
Oh,
more,
wow.
those are more the level of Easter eggs that I put in there rather than callbacks to other books.
Yeah. Josh Shack says King talks about it in his excellent book on writing, about him being hit by a car, I believe.
Yes, yes, he does, and that is a very good book. I like that a lot. There's some really good writing advice in there, and there's some wonderful memoir in there. Like if I recall, half the book really is a memoir,
Hmm.
and the other half is sort of writing advice, and it's a great book.
Darius says, I'm old enough to think 20 years ago is the other day. Yeah,
I
which is
know,
a good point.
I know. I still think the '90s is like 10 years ago.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Yeah. Lawrence says his son almost got hit by a car which in part inspired Pet
Oh,
Cemetery.
I didn't know
However,
that.
I however I don't recommend putting yourself or family members at risk to help inspire your writings.
Now you tell me. Now you
Yeah.
tell me, Lauren. Yeah, no, I think that's it's a good idea, Lauren. But I did not know that about Pet Cemetery.
Mhm.
I think that's really interesting. See, really, writers really do draw from their own lives, the good and the bad.
Hmm. Really interesting.
I guess it's a way for creative people to process things that happen to them, is to write about them.
Mhm.
And maybe that gives them also a semblance of control over something bad that happened to them.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a very good point.
That's my
John, do you have?
armchair psychoanalysis for you.
Yeah. You didn't put your glasses on and some pen and paper.
I do actually
Uh,
wear glasses normally, but the problem is if I wear them here, I get a glare. So
yeah, I have the same problem. Yeah,
yeah.
you're not alone there. Um, so, do you have any, or what are some of your favorite underappreciated books and or authors?
Wow. There are a few authors that I'd really like people to start reading more. One is a guy named Simon Stranza. He's up in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
He is a short story writer, so all he has are short story collections. But he writes really wonderful, what they call weird fiction and strange
Mm-hmm.
tales. He's horror and horror adjacent, but it's just really just great, mind-bending stories. Wonderful stuff. I'd love for more people to be reading Nadia Balkin, who also is mostly a short story writer. She had a collection come out somewhat recently called She Said Destroy, which is just great. Again, she writes more of the sort of weird branch of horror. Olivia Llewellyn, another great writer. I know she's working on a novel, but also is mostly short stories right now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm reading a lot of short story writers that I want people to know about. Um, who else? I remember, I don't know if people are reading Douglas Clegg anymore, but he had a bunch of great books that came out through the 90s and 2000s that are really wonderful. I think they're all either out of print or he brought them back into print himself through ebooks and stuff. So he's definitely an author worth checking out. He's fantastic. Um, John Foster is another great writer that I think more people need to read. He writes a lot of noir stuff, but he also mixes noir with horror really well. So he's great. Daniel Brown writes a lot of great, strange short stories. Yeah, I guess I could go on, but there are so many wonderful writers out there just waiting for people to discover them. It can be hard, though. I mean, not just financially, because books can be expensive, but also a lot of people just don't have time, a lot of time in their lives. So they tend to stick with the authors they know will give them what they want. You know what I mean? If you love Stephen King, you're just going to keep reading Stephen King, of course. Or even newer authors like Josh Malerman is great. Grady Hendrix, Paul Tremblay, who's none of these are actually. I think they're not actually all new, but they've really come into their own recently, um, doing great work. But it can be so hard to know who you haven't heard of who is worth your time.
Yeah.
And I do think that's where things like um, Goodreads or BookTube or now there's Book Talk over on TikTok, where things like that can help. They can really help bring awareness to books that maybe aren't on people's radars. And I know that I watch several booktubers, and I see them reviewing a good mix of like, here's the latest mainstream release that everyone knows about, as well as here's some small press book that I really liked, and I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. That's me. The small press. I like the small press stuff.
Yeah, well, it's a robust part of the publishing industry, the small press, especially for horror. Um, it's really there's so much out there. There's so much out there.
It's wild. It's really there's so many books and so many things to read. It's hard to keep up.
That's a problem we all have. Yeah, I mean, I've been on basically a book buying moratorium for 10 to 15 years now, but I still buy books. Like it's like I'm buying more books than I could possibly read in my lifetime. And I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that one day I'll be on my deathbed and there'll still be a pile of like 100 or 200 books right next to me that I didn't get to. And it's like when you go to a buffet and your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right? So you take a little bit or a lot of everything and you just can't finish it all. It's the same with me in books. I love books. I love reading. It's why I became a writer. And I'm just voraciously collecting them. And I just know I'm never going to get to all of them.
Yeah. It's tough. It's very tough.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, Nicholas, it's been almost 2 hours. I didn't realize how long it's been, but it's been almost 2 hours. So I want to thank you again for coming by. It's been an absolute joy. So I want to thank you for coming by to chat. Let's do
Thank
it
you so
again
much,
sometime
Steve.
soon. Yeah.
I would love to. This has been a real blast, and I'm so grateful for you to have me on the show. And if I could just plug my book one last time,
Of course.
The Hungry Earth. Woo! Cool cover. Mushrooms. Terror mushrooms.
Terror mushrooms. Yeah.
Terror mushrooms. That was the original title.
Yeah, terror mushrooms. Fungi, it's real. Yeah. The real threat.
Oh, thank you. And
Yeah.
thank you to all of
Thanks, Chuck.
you
Yeah.
who tuned in and left comments. And I really appreciate it. And thanks again to Alex, the bookubus, who's
Mhm.
just awesome for introducing me to you
Mhm.
and just making this happen.
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank Alex again because it's a very flattering when someone like Alex would even know who I was. So it's great that she that she mentioned that. So thanks for you and your time, Nicholas and Steve. Your voice is great to listen to. Yeah,
Oh,
this has been
there's
excellent. Looking forward
Alex.
to reading the Hungry. Yeah, there's Alex.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. And thanks again for all your help. I really appreciate it. And I will continue tuning into your videos because I really enjoy them.
One last question from Andres. He says, do you follow what publishers like Tartarus or Aegis? I can't pronounce all those. PS Publishing, Undertow,
Hmm.
Zavaga, etc. put out.
I don't know all of those, but I certainly know Tartarus and I know PS Publishing and I know Undertow. I know Michael Kelly at Undertow very well. He's someone I
Hmm.
consider a friend. They are doing spectacular work. They publish mostly collections, I think, and they are they're like quiet or literary horror, and they're just they have great taste in books, and those books are really outstanding. PS Publishing is actually putting out an anthology either later this year or probably next year. It's a Lovecraft anthology that I have a story in
Hmm.
that I'm very excited about. It's edited by Daryl Schweitzer, and I think it's called Shadows Out of Time. And I'm
Oh
very
wow.
excited for that to come out.
Oh wow, that's
And
cool.
Tartarus puts out wonderful, I think, limited editions, mostly hardcovers of books. Really great stuff.
Awesome. The Wikibus. Thank you again, Alex. I really, really appreciate it. It was very
Yay!
meant a lot to me. There's my friend Matt Lane is here. So you guys are awesome, and I'm going
Oh,
to
thank
read
you,
Matt's book.
Matt.
It's
What
just
is
been
Matt's book?
it's called Pods. Yeah, he
Okay,
just received it recently, a couple days ago, so I'm looking forward to reading it.
cool. Good luck with it, Matt.
Definitely. The rest says thank you. Have fun tomorrow with Linda D. Addison and Kenisha Williams.
Thank you so much. I'm on a panel tomorrow night with these two fantastic authors talking about final girls and how to move past them.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Where
called the
can people?
actual. It'll be. I think it's right here on YouTube.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
I'll be posting it on my social media.
cool.
Um, but it's I think the panel is called "No More Final Girls,"
Hmm.
and it's sort of taking a feminist lens on horror and how to move past sort of one of the things we'll be talking about at least is moving past sort of the male gaze in horror.
Where is that on a certain channel, or where can we find that if we wanted
I
to
don't know
watch it?
yet. I'm not
Okay.
entirely sure yet. I'm not promoting this well,
Yeah.
but it'll be tomorrow night. I think it starts at 8:30. Come by my social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Um, I'm on Instagram, but I don't think there's much happening there. And I'll be posting it then.
Cool. And Matt, sorry, Matt, I'm beta reading. Sorry, I should have been more specific.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
beta.
okay.
Yeah, but I'm
Well,
still
that's
very
cool. That's
excited.
very nice of you. All writers need other eyes on their work, so that's
Yeah,
very nice of you to do that for Matt.
yeah, definitely. Happy to. Oh, I'm flattered that I was even asked, so it's great. So, well, thanks again, Nicholas. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun hearing about science and fungi, all sorts of
And
interesting things.
cicadas
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna go.
mushroom pizzas.
I'm gonna go hide in a well lit closet now.
Yes, the world is definitely different when you know that the mushrooms are out to get you.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, definitely. So thanks again, and thanks to everyone in the chat for coming by. I really appreciate all of you coming by and chatting with us and submitting comments and questions. It makes it 100 times funner when all of you are interacting with us. So well, thank you again for
So
taking the
true. Thank
time
you
to
all so much. And Steve, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And everyone pick up The Hungry Earth. I know I will be right after this conversation. So pick it up and give it a read and leave a review. Let Nicholas know how you liked it.
Yeah, always feel free to contact me anytime if you read something you like.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone have a good weekend. Have a good Friday night. We'll see you soon.